Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome someone I've known for a long time and someone who's busy building healthy cities in the world, Anupam Yog. Anupam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and it's an honor and privilege to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Anupam is working, as he says, placemaking for healthy cities, and you call it your thing. Anupam has worked with the National University of Singapore as an associate director of scale, and he's also in his previous avatar worked with several companies in India, including Abbas Solutions, the Partners LLC, and the Virtuous Retail. So, Anupam, what would you say are three key milestones in your life or your career?
So, I think I'll go in reverse order. I think my third milestone is yet to come.
Okay.
And my second milestone was actually a profound moment when I happened to go for somewhat on a whim for a 10-day silent meditation retreat 3 years ago before I was beginning my MBA journey from Chicago Booth, which was quite an intense program.
Sure.
So decided to take a few days off. What I thought was a digital detox, and a retreat turned out to be a boot camp where they teach you specifically a meditation technique of essentially observing yourself. And that had a profound impact on me physically, mentally, and really shifted my perspective. And we can go into that later. But that was, I suppose, a very important milestone, because it was really after that shift that I decided to pursue education as one of my main themes, and ended up working with the National University of Singapore, as you highlighted earlier. I think prior to that, my first milestone would very much be the beginning of my professional journey, which was with a student organization called ISEC.
Okay.
I was very fortunate to have become a volunteer at the time. This is around the turn of the century. And one of my main motivations at that time was to occupy the role of national president of ISEC in India, the India chapter of this international organization. And I was very fortunate to have been elected into that position, which gave me really a driver's seat in running your own organization at 21, a multinational of its own kind, in fact, one of its kind, enabled me to really understand learning by doing how organizations function. And I think that has to be my best reference point for all the subsequent experiences.
Amazing. So, Anupam, now let's talk about what you're doing currently and what you seem to be very passionate about, which is placemaking for healthy cities. Before I ask you what kind of work you're doing, tell me what is the meaning of placemaking for healthy cities?
So, we are fast becoming an urban species.
Yeah.
We are born in, many of us, and we definitely live most of our lives, at least the majority of the population on this planet now lives in cities. And therefore, we can safely assume, based on recent historical data, that that's the trend. In a few decades, we will, in fact, 70 or 80% of us will be living in cities. And despite what the pandemic may be showing us, that people are relocating, they're actually relocating from bigger cities to smaller cities, but they're still largely choosing to reside in cities.
Okay.
And this has been the focus of my work over the last 15 years. I entered the world of cities through the route of branding, which is somewhat unconventional, but I had an opportunity to work for the Mayor of London for a few years, and that really helped shape my thinking around how cities actually work. And that also created a fascination with urbanization as a trend, and particularly in Asia, where, of course, the majority of the world lives. And I was born and brought up in India, and I still do a lot with India's urbanization challenges in helping us formulate new ways to think about it. And then I also had the opportunity to work on real estate development, which is one of the processes through which we build cities.
Okay.
And combined with what I said in relation to my recent experience with mindfulness and meditation, it really came to me over the last 12 or 18 months that there is a very deep connection between cities and our mental and social health. And I really wanted to unpack that. So quite simply, placemaking for healthy cities, as the phrase suggests, is literally making our places more purpose fit for our mental, social, and physical health. And that's really the work I'm doing now.
Fascinating. And you describe your work as being at the intersection of education, health, and cities. Now, education and health all over the world are being recognized as, to use the startup terminology, the hottest sectors. Help me understand what is the meaning of the intersection of education, health, and cities.
That's a great question. So it really is intrinsic motivation of humans, right? That if you think about our desire to grow, it comes from a desire to learn. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, education, or more broadly, skilling has, of course, become an important topic for policymakers as much as it's become a hot topic for startups as well. Mm-hmm. But I think, to me, learning and managing our health, ultimately, we are all seeking to live longer lives. In fact, there is now evidence that we are living longer lives than ever before. In fact, we've been adding a couple of years to human lifespan every decade since the late 1800s.
Wow.
And we are clearly in the age of the 100-year life. Mm-hmm. And our systems need to respond to this human aspiration and desire to live longer lives. So health is very much at the heart of it. Interestingly, learning and being active is actually one of the factors that scientists have uncovered of what's resulting in longer, healthier, happier lives.
Right.
And cities, as I mentioned earlier, is where our lives play out. Sure. So really, these are the three things that I feel are fundamental drivers. Success, however you define it. So I find it very interesting to work across these three dimensions, and particularly, as I said, at the intersection of that.
Very nice. And again, carrying on from something I read about you, that you said you bring creative strategy, design, and mindfulness as skills to the work of education, health, and cities. Now, with so many big words, try and help me understand what is it that you are doing in these three sectors with all your talent.
Sure. So I think you're absolutely right. These words may sound big, though I hope they're well understood. Mm-hmm. Strategy ultimately is where we want to go. So I think creating the paradigm of health as a way to plan our cities is something that we are not doing as well today. Mm-hmm. We still follow very much the economic growth model or the measure of GDP at a country and at a city and province level. And I think that goes to show that we need to update our ways of how we measure success. Because ultimately, all economic growth is in service of humanity. And if we are not healthier as a result of more economic growth and equitably, then there is a challenge. So I think that I don't have to share why that is. But I think strategy is therefore very important because it helps us, choose our North Star of where we're going. Design, again, is one of those things which has now become, I think, a discipline that is starting to be well understood at all levels. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of strategy and design is quite crucial to implementing solutions. And I use the word creative to qualify strategy because ultimately strategy is often understood as a business process. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a creative process because it necessarily requires inclusion of a variety of stakeholders, particularly when you think about animals like cities or education, which is usually manifest through universities or healthcare or health systems, and particularly mental and social health, which are not very well understood. One of the examples I can share with you that I'm currently working on is imagining and designing and actually delivering mental health gyms. So what does a mental health gym look like, right? I think, and that to me is a fascinating question to ask and answer at this time. Because
tell me what does mental health gym look like?
It looks, so there could be a variety, but ultimately a good general way to think about it is an intentional public space. Mm-hmm. An intentional public space means that we know exactly what its purpose is, and it is equipped in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its design for humans to engage with it for said purpose. So said purpose could be yoga, it could be running, it could be sitting quietly and helping manage our mental health. It also enables social connection without really causing stress on our bodies and our minds. So these are nuances where we need to put in greater effort to understand the response that our minds and bodies are having when we're engaging with the built environment, and particularly public space. As you know, in cities, we move around a lot. And I don't have to tell you what you must feel like when you're sitting in a car from Gurgaon to Delhi, and what sort of happens along that journey. And therefore, we come up with coping mechanisms. So we need to really consider solving for this problem at a big scale. And at a big scale, it's only possible when we create interventions in cities, which is only possible typically in public spaces, because that's where we gather. So a public space could be an urban park. A public space could even be a bus station or a metro station, for example. How do you add intentionality and provide those moments of pause for our minds, where we can sit, we can contemplate, we can reflect, and ultimately recharge and renew, because we lead extremely busy lives. But these are the connections that we start to make with spaces, so that enables our mental health. I hope that gives you some sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me. But let's talk more about health then in our conversation today, since you're doing so much work on it. Mental health is a very, very serious challenge of most urban dwellers, right? Because of the stresses that we go through in our daily lives. But other than mental health, what are the other health challenges city dwellers seem to be facing?
So I think, depending on context, of course, aging population is a big issue that humanity is facing right now. Certainly in my current place, Singapore, aging population is a big challenge that has been articulated.
Yeah.
But elsewhere in the world too, this is a big issue. China is confronting that challenge. So often we look at health through that lens. Often we also look at health through the lens of post-trauma or post-sickness or post-illness care, as opposed to prevention. And that to me is the ultimate shift we need to make in our understanding of health, that it is a continuous investment of time, effort, resource, money, capital, in actually creating health systems that are oriented towards prevention as opposed to care, which means that we have to completely reimagine things like hospitals, which are ultimately assets embedded in the urban environment. And so these connections are very important to draw out, because one thing has an impact on the other. And this requires future planning, because if you have millions of people agglomerating in a city, so you have one part of the system working on a process to say, hey, we want more investment, we want more talent, yet on the other part, we're not actually creating assets to manage this boom, which ultimately means we need to have health systems at a very fundamental level. We are going to be stressed for a variety of reasons. The system is going to be under stress, and we as individuals are going to be under stress. So I feel stress is actually a great way to think about it, because it usually starts manifesting early. We get signals and cues early, but because we are designed to power through stress, we have coping mechanisms socially present, which enable us to say, hey, don't worry, you're young, or you may not be even young, you could be older, but you see someone, or you have a cup of coffee, or you have a drink, or you have a social engagement, and you power through. And we learn to suppress, and we condition ourselves to basically suppress until we break down. And what we're finding is increasing cases of burnout and suppression. So we need to come out and actually, one is having discussion about it. That's all great. But we really need to quite quickly scale solutions that are available to communities and people at scale. So that to me is the most.
So Anup, tell me, you mentioned a little while ago that we are now getting into an age where we probably live to 100, right? And yet the millennials and the Gen Zs, and you're probably part of the category, I find a lot of stress and health related issues in the millennials as well. What are some of the key steps that you would recommend are taken for, and they won't be common obviously, but say for the millennials or the people who are in the 40s or people like me who are in their early 60s, what should we be doing differently to be able to make our place, and only if we are healthy will a city become healthy?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you've cited a bunch of different age groups there, so I'm going to try and tackle each one.
Okay.
Let me start with, and with all humility, I don't have an answer for everyone. And this
No,
is simply
obviously,
my
just your thoughts.
perspective.
Absolutely.
So this is simply my perspective. And I would say the one common thread across it is to view mental health management as a skill. Just like in a very crude way, we view now dental health, right? We brush our teeth every day. We didn't always, by the way. So it's only like 300 years ago since the modern dental care industry was invented. So I think it's almost like managing our mental health on a daily basis. So I think unless there is a clear acceptance of that across age groups, we're not going to make a big shift as humanity.
Sure.
I think in terms of different age groups at this point in time, I feel the lived experience of older generations is a tremendous asset, but perhaps it's not viewed as such because culturally we find ourselves in this situation where we're celebrating on one hand startup successes, younger people, and I think that's great. As a younger person who struggled to get ahead because oftentimes you were judged on the basis of your age, I think it's great that we have this celebration of youth, and that's very helpful. But I think equally we need not just acknowledgement, but actually leveraging this idea that we have collective experience and wisdom in a practical way. What that means is we need to really revisit things like retirement age. We need to really revisit things like, can we continue to reinvent ourselves? Can we go back to school, university later in life? Could we actually have multiple degrees, diplomas, if that is the sort of learning that drives you? Could we have employment practices that encourage starting careers over and over again, so you can live a life with multiple careers and that's celebrated? So to me, those are the things to do perhaps in the two age groups you mentioned of the 60s and the 40s. I mean, I'm doing that myself. One of the most intentional choices I made post my meditation experience was to really take a hard look at where I was and in many ways have chosen to reset. Okay. And that has been such a liberation at its own level because it allows you to really look at approaching things with a beginner's mind, with a sort of curiosity which I felt I had actually lost 20 years ago with the kind of zeal I looked at stuff. I think I've suddenly sort of reconnected with it. So it's been very valuable. Okay. And I think then talking about the youngest generation, I feel, as I said, it's almost creating more flexibility, that you don't necessarily have to follow the trajectory of what ultimately results in retirement. We start with, hey, you've got to study, work, retire. So I think those two elements of study and work also need to be revisited. People could be studying for a longer period of time. In fact, lifelong learning is very crucial. Yeah. And then people can be working in all sorts of different ways, right? I mean, shorter assignments, you don't have to commit yourself to one organization throughout your life, so on and so forth.
Very interesting. So let me now move to another section of our conversation, and I'm going to skip several questions. But you said you use the Ikigai tool to develop a personal framework. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so as you know, the Ikigai framework is one of the several frameworks out there which allows you to basically start to frame your thoughts in a structure. And it talks about mission, passion, vocation, and profession. And to me, that was helpful because I am a polymath. I have huge interest in multiple things. And till very recently, I almost felt that was a handicap. And then I decided to embrace that because I do enjoy working on a bunch of different things and collaborating with multiple teams. That also allows me to form a holistic view in my head, my meta map of the world. And that's only possible because I learn from others. And there are experts in many fields. I perhaps can claim expertise in one or two things, but ultimately I rely on the expertise of others in many matters.
Right.
So to me, having this framework was very useful. One, because it allowed me to isolate a few things which are going to drive my current view of what I want to do and my future. So I have chosen to really commit to each of these dimensions of Ikigai. So I'm very passionate about mindfulness. I feel my mission is cities, improving the urban environment for better health. And I'm very interested, of course, in taking advantage of the experience I've had over the last 2 decades of my working experience. So education and real estate are the two areas, and technology, I suppose, connects it all. So I see design and strategy as my as my vocation, if you will, and I see management as my profession. I was fortunate to have just completed an MBA, perhaps again consistent with what I said later in life, and I found it extremely useful because I thought I understood business, but having real rigorous training to understand the language of business was extremely useful. So I think that's how the framework guides me now, and hopefully will continue to into the future.
Fascinating. So I'm going to now move to the last segment of our conversation. A few questions for you personally. I probably have time for 2, maybe 3 questions. You say your mantra for the new year is slow and deliberate, and yet you are busier than ever.
Yeah,
so understand this.
Very counterintuitive, but I suppose the pandemic last year forced us all to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think I was particularly fortunate to have my mindfulness practice, which enabled me to practice longer hours, while I was, of course, at the same time finding myself to be far more productive than ever. So in a sense, I started sowing some seeds at the end of last year towards the new direction I'm charting for myself, which I shared with you earlier. And it has allowed me to suddenly find myself in the situation where I have a portfolio of projects, and I am able to manage that effectively. And so I am busier than ever, but I find that being slow and deliberate is really what helped me get here. And therefore, I continue to invest time and effort in being slow and deliberate. I don't necessarily like being busier than ever. So I feel that it's important to continue, and that's why I said it's my mantra for the year, because I keep reminding it's on the wall, be slow and deliberate. But it really has helped me unlock a level of productivity that I did not have.
Fantastic. And, in your new avatar, as you are rediscovering yourself, reinventing yourself, as you look back and as you look ahead, what does success mean to Anupam from where you are today?
I think, I suppose this has been reasonably consistent for me, except that I feel more confident in my definition of success today. Success for me has always meant high quality relationships. I'm a pretty social person, and at one level, I actually have learned the skill of now being alone, which has actually helped me be social better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, success is really about leading a healthy life and helping in some way my family, my community. Wherever you go, ultimately that's where you are. So
Sure.
My current community, and I think a healthy respect for where I come from. So I come from a small town, which is not so small, I guess now, but I'd still like to believe it's small. It's Lucknow in India, where I hope to, for me, success would look like a healthy, livable Lucknow in my lifetime.
Fantastic. And from a work perspective and in your personal perspective, what are some of the core values you believe in?
So to me, I think transparency and fairness are 2 very core values for me. Sometimes I find myself at odds because the world doesn't necessarily work around these 2 ideas, but they've stood me in good stead. I think I can sleep well at night knowing that, I gave it my best and I was transparent and I was fair. And I think quality, my dad, I must say, helped me understand quality very early in life. And so I'm grateful for that, because often I find myself as working as part of a team or a system and we're chasing tangible numbers, goals. But I always remind myself, look, all of that is meaningless if it's not quality. And that could mean so many different things, but I guess that's the other core value.
Absolutely. And my last question to you, and this is a question to you on failure. I've often said that parents in India or South Asia or maybe Asia don't teach children it's okay to fail. We always told be first in line, first in class, etc. And that manifests itself in our behavior patterns. Yet we fail and we learn. My question to you, Anupam, is what are some of your learnings from some of your mistakes?
Yeah, so I think I must also share a comment on the point about parents. So I think parents are part of a larger ecosystem and culture. So I think our parents have gone through a particularly difficult, it's a pattern that repeats itself.
Sure.
So I think it's a cultural phenomena, and I think it's particularly true of Asia. But I think we are becoming more self-aware.
Correct.
So for me, the biggest learning, to be honest, is I have been allowed to fail, if you will, whether it's because I have believed in that for a long time, and perhaps ISEC set me off in that direction.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I've learned is to carry on, take your time. It's always good to reflect, but carry on, because life is not about past failures. It's about the ability to keep going. I suppose the other thing that happened to me growing up in Lucknow and Lamatnia was our motto was never give in, never give up. So I think that stuck with me, and I believe in that.
Fantastic. Anupam, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I've really enjoyed listening to all your thoughts on, healthy cities and, mental health and what we can all be doing. Thank you again, and wish you lots of success.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.